Good evening, everyone. This evening's edition of Music and Sound is one of our series devoted to first-hand conversation with some of the great artists of our day. One of the best loved of them all is Andres Segovia, a legend in his own time. Apart from universal recognition as the greatest guitar virtuoso, Segovia, like all great men, is a pioneer. All his life, for instance, he's fought for the recognition of his instrument as being just as suitable for performing concertos with orchestra as is, say, the piano or the violin. Segovia constantly urges composers to write more music for the classic guitar to build up the rather scanty repertoire. And Segovia's efforts have borne fruit, and this is largely due to the efforts of one man. Mario Castelnuovo-Tedesco has written more music for Mr. Segovia than any other composer, and the two artists are closely associated. Right now, I'm sitting at Mr. Tedesco's side in his studio in Beverly Hills. He's at his piano, and I think quite ready to tell us some of the wonderful things regarding this unique association. Mr. Tedesco, how did you begin your association with Mr. Segovia?
Well, my association with Segovia actually started in 1932. I had met him before. I had heard him in concert, but he had never asked me to write anything for the guitar. It was at the International Festival of Venice in 1932 that we met. He came there with Manuel de Falla, yes, who was conducting his little opera Master Pedro puppet show. And I was playing in the festival my first piano quintet with a Poltronieri quartet. And we were both very close friends of de Falla, and so we met several times. But yet he didn't ask me to write anything for the guitar. It was only the last day of a festival that he met my wife on the Vaporino, the little boat which shuttles between Venice and the Lido, and he told her, well, I have never dared to ask anything to your husband, but I would be so happy if he would write something for my instrument. He was leaving the same day, so he left to my wife his address, which was at that time in Geneva, in Switzerland. So my wife came back to the hotel and gave me the message, and I immediately wrote to Segovia, dear Segovia, I would be so happy to write something for you because I have admired you for a long time, but I must confess you that I haven't the slightest idea how to write for the guitar.
I was just going to ask you, you hadn't written any music for the guitar at all at that time?
No. I didn't even know that one writes for the guitar 1 octave higher of the actual sound.
I didn't know that either.
And so Segovia sent me from Geneva a slip of paper where he had written the way the guitar is tuned, which is this way. The guitar has 6 strings. By the way, the lowest string, the E string, can be lower to the D, which makes it convenient to write in D major, which is the key in which I wrote my Guitar Concerto later. But at the time, so Segovia sent me this slip of paper and 2 sets of variations. One was the variation of Sor, on the theme of Mozart, a classical work. And the other were the variation by Ponce on the Folie d'Espagne. And Segovia warned me, these are about the most difficult pieces in the guitar literature, don't go beyond that. As I had been given as model 2 sets of variation, I thought I will try some variation myself. And I had an amusing idea. As the history of the guitar runs through so many centuries in different styles, I thought I will write a work called Variations Through the Centuries, starting more or less in the Bach style, in the lute style, and becoming through the variation, always more modern, romantic in Schubert's time, so to say, and ending in modern times with a foxtrot. Anyway, I sent to Segovia the first group of variations, the one, let's say, in the Bach style, just to know if they were playable, because I didn't know. And I had, of course, to wait some days to get the answer. Now, generally, when I write very fast. So while I was waiting for Segovia's answer, I completed the whole piece. So the answer of Segovia came saying that the first variation were perfect. So I sent him the complete piece, and he wrote me back, it is the first time that I find a composer who immediately understands how to write for the guitar. As a matter of fact, he changed just a few chords in the composition.
I would think that's very rare. How did you go about learning to write for the instrument? Do you play the instrument yourself?
No, I couldn't even play on the open strings. It is a sort of instinct which I have for instrument. You know, I have written 2 violin concertos and I don't play the violin. I have written a cello concerto. My only instrument actually is the piano, and perhaps I write better for the other instrument than for the instrument I play myself.
The guitar is a very agile kind of an instrument, though, isn't it? You can write very quick passage work for the guitar.
Yes. Up to a certain point. Of course, you must always keep in mind, the guitar has many possibilities, having 6 strings, has the possibility, of course, of polyphonic writing. But the fingering of pieces for guitar is a great problem. I know even for Segovia himself, he spends a long time figuring out the way of fingering certain passages.
Well, Segovia, I imagine, still practices a great deal, doesn't he?
Oh, always, constantly. Yes.
I've read about
Of course, to achieve this perfection of sounds, which he's looking for.
It's so wonderful. It's just wonderful.
Now, after I wrote, to go on with the story, after I wrote this piece for guitar, Variations through the Century, Segovia was very happy and played it all over during the season. The next year he came back and he told me, you know that your old countryman Boccherini, the 18th century composer, was very fond of the guitar. Why don't you write now for me a larger work, a sonata in 4 movements as a homage to Boccherini? And I did it. He was again very pleased with the work, which is he has just recorded now in his last...
In the last recording?
I guess. And so he played the sonata during the following season. Then the next year he came back and he told me, you know, also Paganini was very fond of the guitar. So why don't you write now a homage to Paganini? And for Paganini I wrote a Capriccio Diabolico, devilish capriccio, which is really devilishly difficult.
It's still playable, though.
Yes, and actually Segovia was so fond of this piece that although he's generally rather slow in studying new pieces, 20 days after he had received the piece, he gave the first performance in London. And this also he has recorded and he has played it always very much. Now, after this following year again, Segovia came with his biggest request. He said, well, my ambition all my life has been to play with orchestra, but there are no concertos for guitar and orchestra. Would you write one? Now, that time I was afraid. Because although by that time I had already experimented the guitar and knew more or less how to write for the instrument, yet I had never heard the guitar associated with an orchestra, or even with a smaller group, as a matter of fact. And so I postponed the plan for a couple of years to make him happy. I wrote some more pieces for guitar solo. One is the Tarantella, which he always plays. It's one of my most popular pieces. And finally, in 1938, I was about to leave Italy to emigrate to the United States, and Segovia came to Florence to spend the Christmas vacation with me. He knew I was very depressed at the idea of leaving my native country, and so he was very nice and very kind. And I told him I hadn't been writing music for some time. I told him, well, the first work which I will write now will be the Guitar Concerto. As a matter of fact, I wrote the first movement of a Guitar Concerto during the week he was in Florence, and we could write it together. Then I left for North America, he left for South America, and I sent him the other two movements to Montevideo, where he was living at the time, and where he performed it actually for the first time in 1939. Was this the
first concerto that's been written for?
Yes, this was the first concerto which has been written for guitar and orchestra.
What kind of an orchestra did you
Now,
use?
of course, it was a problem of quantity and quality of sound. I tried to give the appearance of an orchestra without giving the weight of an orchestra, because of course the quantity of sound of a guitar is very limited. And so I used one flute, one oboe, two clarinets, one bassoon, one horn, timpani, which always play pianissimo, by the way, and a small group of strings. Actually, in my score, I had mentioned two first violin, two second violins, two viola, two celli, and one bass, a double quartet plus one bass. Yeah. Segovia used, I believe, 6 violins instead of 4, because he said that it could afford a little more sound, and it's perfectly balanced the way it is. Now it is very strange because, as I say, the concerto was first played in 1939 in Montevideo when the war came, and of course we were separated for many years. I didn't hear the concerto myself until 1951.
Oh, how long is that after you wrote it then?
12 years.
12 years.
12 years, and he had played it already all over where he could go, in South America, then in Europe, then in New York. Yes, I heard it I heard the first movement broadcasted from New York, but the first live performance I heard was in 1951. And this actually gave origin to another work, because when he played it here in Los Angeles, he was approached by the Music Guild, the Chamber Music Society here in Los Angeles, and he was asked if following year he would play a concert of chamber music. And he objected, well, there is very little chamber music with guitar. There is this small quartet by Schubert with flute, violoncello, and guitar. There is Boccherini, and there is some Paganini, which isn't very good. So he said, I will play in a chamber music concert only on condition that Mario writes for me a guitar quintet.
I think this was on the back of the jacket of the quintet.
Yes.
I remember that.
And so I took the challenge and I wrote the guitar quintet, which he played the next year, following year with a Paganini quartet.
What would you suggest as being the most appropriate first complete piece of music we hear in the program?
I believe it would be the Guitar Concerto.
The concerto?
Yes.
I see. Now, before we hear it, is there anything particular?
Well, I can tell you that the concerto is in 3 movements, as any regular concerto. And the first movement is classical in character. It is still more Boccherini style, I would say.
Boccherini is a favorite composer of yours, I think.
Yes, it's a sort of pre-Mozart Italian.
Very, very much underrated composer.
Yes, of course, very little is printed of his music.
Some fine string quartets.
Yes, very fine.
Well, I see the score of the concerto on the piano here.
Yes, and so the first movement, for instance, has this theme, which is, I would say, characteristic 18th century. This is the theme of the first movement, which it's in a regular a sonata allegro form and has a cadenza before the end. I amused myself to write the cadenza. Actually, it's what I most enjoy writing when I write concertos, are the cadenzas, which I try to do not so much virtuosistic, but as I would say, condensing the musical material of a piece. Yes.
The essence of the work,
yes. Now, the second movement has a more romantic character. It is actually a sort of farewell to the hills of Tuscany, which I was about to leave. This was the last work I wrote in Italy before coming to the United States. And it starts with a guitar solo, which I'm going to play you now.
Nostalgic theme, very beautiful too.
And the last movement, of course, I was writing a work for Segovia, so I had to put a Spanish touch in it. And it is, I would say, in the style of some old Spanish ballad.
Yes. Is this stated on the orchestra first?
That is stated from the orchestra first.
You certainly captured the Spanish spirit there, I think.